Your emergency fund or your rainy day fund is an essential component of financial planning, and conventional wisdom tells us to keep between 3 and 6 months equivalent of our essential expenditure in cash as an emergency fund. But when is the right time to use this money? How do you tell the difference between a rainy day and a day when it's just a bit cloudy? That's coming up in this video. Hi everyone, I'm Martin Bamford, a chartered financial planner at Informed Choice, and in this video I'm asking a very important question, one I don't believe that gets asked very often, and that is, when is the right time to access your emergency fund? How do you tell the difference between a genuine emergency, a genuine rainy day, and a nice to have or just a bit of a cloudy day, a day when you can avoid accessing that cash emergency fund? So I'll come on and share some tips about that decision making. It's a very important decision making process. But first, let's go back to basics a little bit, just to talk about what an emergency fund or a rainy day fund really is. And essentially, it's a cash buffer. It's an emergency reserve to make sure that if you do face a genuine financial emergency, you don't have to resort to other more serious ways to raise money to get hold of cash you need to deal with that emergency. So instead of having to go out and borrow money on a credit card or a personal loan or even something like a payday loan, or go begging to friends and family, you have sitting there a cash emergency fund that you can tap into, that you can take money from and deal with that financial emergency. Now, conventional wisdom, as I said in the introduction, is to keep the equivalent of 3 to 6 months worth of your essential expenditure in cash as a rainy day fund or a cash emergency fund. Essential expenditure rather than your total monthly expenditure. So look at everything you spend each month and look at the items you absolutely had to spend if you had nothing coming in. That's your essential expenditure. It typically includes your housing costs, your mortgage or your rent. It will include the cost of food, the cost of essential utilities, the cost of transport, etc. But stuff you absolutely have to pay, the bills you have to pay on time each and every month to keep on going. Exclude the discretionary stuff, the stuff that's optional, the stuff you don't have to spend. That doesn't get included in that calculation for how much to keep in your emergency fund. But look at your essential expenditure for a month, multiply that by 3 to 6. 6 I think is better than 3 personally, but it depends on the stage of your financial life. But multiply it by, say, 6, and that's how much your target emergency fund size should be. Now, there is some debate at the moment about whether or not 3 months or 6 months even is enough to have in a cash emergency fund. And I think given our experience with this pandemic, which looks likely to last for up to 18 months in total, once the vaccine's out there, once we've got some herd immunity, once we're back to some sort of normality, 18 months is excessive probably to try and keep that much in a cash emergency fund, but you probably do need more than 6 months, and 12 months, a year's worth of essential expenditure could now be a more reasonable, more realistic target for your cash emergency fund. Now, as well as your cash emergency fund or your rainy day fund keeping you out of trouble when you face a genuine financial emergency, it's also a fantastic psychological tool. It's something that can deliver genuine peace of mind and help you to sleep easily at night, because you know, should something bad happen in your life, you've got that cash reserve sitting there. You've got some resources you can tap into, that you can access to get you through those difficult times, to see you through that rainy day. But once you have that cash emergency fund in place, how do you know when the right time is to actually use it? What is a genuine financial emergency? And there's a few ways to look at this, but I think it's really important to understand the difference between a genuine need to tap into your cash emergency fund and a sort of a borderline case, something that doesn't quite meet the criteria. So let's look at some different ways to assess what a genuine financial emergency looks like. And at a headline level, I think a genuine financial emergency is one which leaves you with no other viable options at that time. So if you're looking at a situation you find yourself in, and the only thing you can do to get you through that emergency is to use some or all of the money in your cash emergency, that is probably a genuine financial emergency. There are probably 3 tests that you should apply to understand whether or not a financial emergency warrants using your cash emergency fund, your rainy day fund. First Firstly, it should be urgent. It should be something that's happening right now, right this second. Secondly, that it's necessary, that there's no other viable alternatives, as I mentioned a moment ago, but to access your cash emergency fund. And thirdly, that it was completely unexpected, because if it was in any way expected, your cash emergency fund is not the right type of resource to pay for it. You had an opportunity to build other resources, to save up separately, to invest separately, to create a separate pot of money to deal with that expected situation. Something that's expected is not an emergency, whereas if it's unexpected, it can be. So urgent, necessary, unexpected, I think, are three really important tests that we should apply before accessing a cash or rainy day emergency fund. So urgent, necessary, and unexpected are three crucial tests to apply before deciding whether or not to access your cash emergency fund, your rainy day fund. And in terms of real life examples of what these emergencies might look like, maybe your car's broken down and you've got no other way to get to your job unless you can get that car repaired quickly. Maybe the boiler in your house is broken and you need a new boiler, and it was something you weren't planning to replace for another, say, 3 to 5 years, so it wasn't part of your existing financial plan. Maybe you need some emergency dental work. We're very lucky here in the UK to have the National Health Service, the NHS, but obviously that's not the situation in other countries around the world. But some types of medical incidents here in the UK still do require some access to a cash emergency fund, and dental work is probably the best example of that. But whatever the emergency is, make sure it is urgent, necessary, and unexpected. Make sure your financial emergency passes those three tests. One sensible approach you can take right now is to make a list. Write down some tangible examples of things that would justify you accessing your cash emergency fund, your rainy day fund. Make that list, and when an emergency does arise in the future, refer back to it, cross-reference your list and say, does it appear on that list of things I previously decided would cross the threshold, would genuinely justify me using my cash emergency fund? Your financial emergency in the future may not be precisely the same as the things you wrote down on your list, but they may be very similar. And if you do that, and if you apply those three tests of urgent, necessary, and unexpected, then that is a good reason to use your cash emergency fund. And if you do decide to use that money that you've put aside for a rainy day, use it. Don't feel guilty about it, because that is the purpose of saving that money, of setting it aside, of having it available for a genuine financial emergency. I know many people, when they have to tap into their rainy day fund, feel really guilty about doing so. And assuming it's a genuine financial emergency, assuming it passes those three tests, don't feel guilty about it. It's served its purpose. Without that ability to access money in an emergency fund, in a rainy day fund, you have to resort to other, probably more desperate options. Put in the expenditure on your credit card, for example, or taking out a personal loan, both of which come with expensive interest rates. You may even be forced into an even more expensive interest rate scenario and having to take out a short-term payday loan, and that really is something you should avoid at all costs. You might have to go and ask friends or family members for a short-term loan. That might be your only viable option at the time. Or you may even have to sell things that you own in order to raise the cash to pay for your financial emergency. So having a cash emergency fund and occasionally using it when there is a genuine financial emergency, this is a good thing. This is not something to feel bad about. It's done its job. Because if you don't have access to a pot of money to deal with financial emergencies, and if for any reason you're not able to borrow expensive money or sell things to raise money, then think about worst case scenarios here. What would happen if you're unable to meet your day-to-day expenditure? For example, if you lose your job, do you then fall behind on your mortgage or your rent? Do you face the risk of repossession or eviction? Do you have the bailiffs sent round? Not something that's happening currently during a pandemic. It's been placed on hold for now. But during normal times, certainly a risk if you don't keep up your essential expenditure. All of these sorts of things can happen if, for any reason, through bad luck or bad health, we lose our job, or we're faced with an unexpected bill that absolutely has to be paid for us to be able to continue with our day-to-day lives. This can lead very quickly down a spiral of debt and of bad financial situations. And the worst case scenario here is really quite unthinkable, which is why that cash emergency fund is such a foundational element of your financial plan. It really is essential to have in place. Assuming you do face a financial emergency and you access money in your rainy day fund, it's essential that you start the process of replenishing that emergency fund as soon as you can afterwards. Really, that becomes mission number one after you've spent your cash emergency fund, to put money back into it, because you never know when the next rainy day might come along when you need to access that money again and tap back into it. If you don't already have a gap in your budget between what you earn and what you spend, and you're not able to allocate that gap, that excess cash each month, to replenish in your emergency fund, then you do have to sit down and take a really good hard look at your budget and look for areas of savings, look for things you can cut back on to increase the gap, to make sure you have leftover cash at the end of each month, or even better, at the start of each month, to allocate back towards your cash emergency fund. Even think about money you're allocating to other savings or other investment objectives, and ask yourself whether those should be temporarily put on hold until you've replenished your cash emergency fund. So do work hard and get straight to work immediately on that replenishment activity once you've had to spend money in your cash emergency fund. And depending on how uncomfortable or how vulnerable you feel without a cash emergency fund, having spent some of it on a genuine financial emergency, you may take even further measures to start that replenishment. So for example, you could ask your employer if you can do some overtime hours to earn a bit more. You may even take up temporarily at least a part-time job to earn a little bit more each month that you can funnel straight into your rainy day fund. Alternatively, you might look at things in your house that you haven't used or no longer want and sell those on eBay, sell them on Facebook Marketplace, raise some money to replenish that cash emergency fund, because once spent, it does need to be replaced as quickly as possible. Have you ever experienced a rainy day, and have you as a result accessed your cash emergency fund? Let me know in the comments down below. Tell me about your experience. Tell me about the criteria that you used to decide whether it was a genuine financial emergency or not. Thank you for watching this video. Please do press the like and subscribe button below. I'm Martin Bamford, and when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.